What's up, guys? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Emma if you're new here, and I'd love to talk about all things Peloton, cycling, and fitness. So be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. I post every single Sunday, and today's video is exciting. It is your sign to either take for the first time or retake your FTP test because that's what I'm going to be doing. So if you can tell by my background, which means you are a loyal follower, I am in LA. I'm visiting my boyfriend. I typically live in SF where I ride my Echelon bike and take Peloton classes. But in LA, my boyfriend actually has a Peloton, which is very nice. I take Power Zone classes on my Echelon bike, and I would recommend doing that with the Q Do My OS Swift app. And you could definitely take the FTP test using this app too, but it is a lot easier just to take the FTP test on the Peloton in my opinion. And I have really been pushing this off. I do not like taking the FTP test, but I really enjoy doing Power Zone rides, so it's really important to kind of have an updated score. And the last time that I was here, I was taking like a casual 20-minute like pop ride, and I beat my FTP test 20-minute score just from that pop ride, which shows that I like really need to retake it, that my zones are outdated. But I've just been pushing it off because it is always such a hard ride. But now that I'm back in LA, I have no excuses. Someone commented asking me for tips for FTP tests, so I'm like, this is my sign. It's time to retake this test. So I thought that I would give you some of my tips for the FTP test, and then I would just take it. And if you're overdue, it's time for you to take yours too. It's not fun, but we need to do it. Also, if you're confused about what the FTP test is, I've done an entire video just on Power Zone training in general where I kind of walk over all of the different aspects of it. So you can go watch that and then take your FTP test. But this is going to be my third time that I've taken the test. I definitely should be taking it more frequently. I just really push it off. The first time is definitely the hardest if you've never taken it before because you have to set your pace. I would recommend taking a 20-minute ride before taking an FTP test, just so you have some baseline that you can follow along with, like, oh, this is a reasonable output for me to take in the 20 minutes. But once you get that first test, it's easier to like pace yourself in subsequent tests because you can see where you were during that first test, basically. So you could just try to like go a little bit above it at all times, and then you'll see an improvement in your score. I think most instructors recommend the 4 or 5 minute segments where essentially you start out easier and then you get harder every 5 minutes until the end where you're just trying to do like max output as much as possible. And I agree with this approach. I don't think that there's any way that you can sustain like really, really high output for 20 minutes because then you could definitely go higher if you like staggered it. I would also recommend sitting down and kind of looking at past rides or thinking about past rides. For me personally, high resistance and lower cadence will give me a higher output than high cadence and lower resistance. I just can't go that fast, but I can really grind out the high resistance. So that's kind of how I get a better score. I've looked at comparing my two FTP tests, and the first time I had a higher average cadence, but my output was lower because I just can't take that resistance. So really think about like, how do you get your most power? Because that will be helpful in the class. I plan on grinding out high resistance. I definitely still need to spin out during the class just to kind of recover my legs. And I also plan on coming out of the saddle sometimes, but they really recommend that you stay like mostly in the saddle. But I also need to come out of the saddle to kind of spin my legs out and like allow myself to grind out this resistance for 20 minutes. So that's my game plan. I'll let you know after I take the class, like how well I stuck to it. It's been quite some time since I've taken the FTP test, so it'll be interesting. I don't remember a ton. Another thing to consider when you're taking the FTP test is you want this to be like the best conditions possible so you can get your highest output, so you don't need to like retake it again in 2 weeks. So for me, that means getting up early and having time to actually wake up. I usually kind of roll out of bed, drink coffee, and then I'm on the bike within like 20 minutes. But I woke up almost an hour ago, so I'm definitely more awake now. I also usually only drink coffee, but I have this banana that I'm going to eat and then like let it settle before I ride just to give myself some more energy. Also, highly, highly recommend the FTP test warm-up class. It's a 10-minute warm-up. You don't want to be warming up in the FTP test. It's not going to be a good time. You could definitely get higher resistance. So you really want a long warm-up class so you're feeling really, really good at the peak. And then there's just a bunch of little things like wearing workout clothes that are super comfortable that you like. I also usually do strength classes before biking. I'm not going to do that. I usually do an hour ride. I'm only going to be focusing on the FTP test today, just because I think even in my mind, if I'm like, oh, after the FTP test, I can take some other ride, I'm going to be saving energy for that ride. And I don't want that. I need to lay out all my energy in this class. So just the FTP test today, nothing else. I don't have to worry about saving my energy. I also have no soreness from yesterday. I did easier rides. I did an easier workout just to kind of prepare myself for today. I think a lot of people also will just take the previous day off so that they're in like pristine condition for this test. You really got to prepare for it. And then my last tip would be to take the same FTP warm up and test every single time. I don't think that you have to follow this advice. I just think that if you have the same instruction every time, you're more likely to not have something weird happen. Like you never know if an instructor is going to say something that will kind of like mess with your head almost. It's not a big thing to worry about, and I'm actually not going to follow it. I've taken the same Matt Wilper's FTP test twice, but Ben Eldis recently became a Power Zone instructor, so I really want to take his FTP test, and I feel like I'll probably stick with his test after this. So I'm changing tests, like it's not the end of the world, but I think that in terms of like consistency, it's a good idea just to take the same test every single time. Those were all of my tips that I could think of. I'm going to eat this banana, let it settle a little bit, and then I'll see you when I'm actually going to take my FTP warm up and test, and I'll let you know how it goes afterwards. That ride was very, very intense. So I had a couple thoughts during it. First off, I didn't do this, but the smart thing would have been to stack the warm up and then the FTP test so that you can just go straight into it. Because essentially, once you're done with the warm up, you don't want to stop pedaling at all. The warm up was fine. It was good. We started out in like zone 1, very low for probably the first 5 minutes. And then we had some spin ups. And then we went into zones 3 and 4 at the end. And Ben was like, basically, you should start your test at a zone 4, which I believe is a pace that you could hold for a little under an hour. So if you don't know your zones yet, to try to like find that in a minute, I mean, that's not easy. And I didn't want to go at my zone 4 because I thought that my FTP test was so outdated that zone 4 would be too low. So I think I started a little too hard out of the gate. I started at zone 5, like low zone 5, high zone 4. So I didn't see that much improvement over time, but I did hold steady. I actually did more spin outs than I thought. I would like lower my resistance to around 45 and then try to spin out at like 90 to keep my output up, but also get spin outs. I also came out of the saddle every couple of minutes for like 30 seconds. And at the end, there were pushes where I came out of the saddle for all of those to really drive up that output at the end. Once I got into the FTP test, I took the full minute that Ben was talking before the class actually started to also spin out my legs. I just wanted to spin out as much as possible before starting this because I feel like my legs locking up is like the biggest thing for me. Like I'm definitely exerting myself a lot and my breathing's really heavy, but I feel like what really gets me is my legs like feeling very cramped, and that's because I go at a high resistance. And then every time I came out of the saddle, I would drop my cadence even more and just crank up the resistance to keep that output. But I think overall I held it pretty steady. You can see if you look at my graphs that my resistance is like going like this because I'm cranking it up and then I'm coming back down in the saddle and then I'm spinning out, so it's going really down. But I think overall my output was pretty good. My total output for my FTP test from the last time I took it was 208 and I got it up to 244, which is a huge difference. I definitely should have been taking this FTP test more frequently, and I think that obviously I should be doing this in the future. I feel like you should just set like, I'm going to take this every 6 weeks and just do it and normalize like not getting a better score. My thing is I don't want to take it unless if I feel like my zones have actually changed, and then my zones have changed before this, right? But I just was kind of modifying the power zone classes as I took them instead of just retaking the FTP test. So I'm glad that I retook it, got a new score. They actually used the average output of the class to compute your FTP zones, which I forgot because when it came up, it pops up and it's asked like, oh, is this an okay score to use? I was like, oh, that's really low because it was like 195. I knew they took off 5%, but it's because my average output for the class was 204. So they were using the 204, took off 5%, and then used the 194, 195 to compute my zones. So excited to get those. I think that that's pretty much all I have to say about this test. It was definitely really hard. I definitely recommend a cool down ride. I did a 20-minute low impact ride. I have one by Hannah Frankson that I love. Did that just to really like spin it out because I was going so hard in the class. That's definitely the hardest class that I've taken in a really long time because you just have to push yourself endlessly with like no break. So it was definitely nice to just have a super long recovery ride after that. I would highly recommend it. So that's it for this video. Let me know if you take the FTP test, if you're going to get into power zones, if you need to retake your test. I hope I inspired you all. I'm glad that making this video really helped me accountable to take this test, so that helped too. And let me know if there's any other videos you'd like me to do. I feel like I have a ton of ideas because Peloton's always coming out with new content, but I also like to hear from you guys, like, what do you actually want to see? I hope you guys are having an awesome week, staying safe, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!